Hi, I'm Liz Gale, third generation ex-Scientologist. Today is an important video, and I appreciate you being here. I want to raise the red flag on Scientology's newest social media campaign targeting mothers and children. As a mandatory reporter in the field of childcare, I am sounding the alarm for all educators, professionals, child advocates, mothers, cult survivors, and legislators. I'm begging you, as a child who grew up in Scientology herself, please take a few minutes to watch this video and understand the dangers of both this campaign and Scientology's practices and procedures. I will explain this dangerous campaign, what it means, and how we can protect vulnerable children and families from this cult's predatory behavior. Growing up in Scientology myself, I understand the intricate workings and the secret policies and procedures that affect children and families. I've seen firsthand the devastation that Scientology's shunning, also called disconnection, has had on children's lives. There are dozens of firsthand accounts online of children being forced into interrogation, manual labor, trafficked across state lines, neglected and abused. My own brother didn't make it out of Scientology alive. Sadly, my brother's story and his tragic demise are not wholly unique in Scientology. Online, you can find the receipt, the children that Scientology failed, a list of almost 200 names of children who were born or raised in Scientology, got out, and have spoken out against the abuses they endured. Also on this list is over a dozen young people who didn't make it out of their Scientology upbringing alive. In trying to make sense of my life and trauma, my healing journey took me to the field of child development, where I received both an associate's and a bachelor's in the field of child and family studies with a specialization in early childhood education. Working closely with children and families over the last 20 years has taught me something that my 7-year-old self found out the hard way. Many of Scientology's practices are dangerous, and some are downright abusive. In this video, I will break it down for you. As with all things on the internet, this is my opinion based on my experience, my education, my understanding. You can take it or leave it. I encourage you, please hear me out. Lastly, before I begin, I'd like to make a distinction I feel is important in the broader conversation. Not just the Scientology conversation, but all religious, fanatic, high control, or cult-like groups. There's a difference between Scientology's beliefs and its practices. I am not here to attack anyone's beliefs or their protected religious rights. However, when action is taken on behalf of one's beliefs, those actions are accountable legally, morally, and socially. There is no freedom of religion that allows for the abuse of the elderly or children, neglect, mental, emotional, verbal, or spiritual abuse, no matter the belief system of the group. Scientology is a billion-dollar international cult with a team of lawyers and private investigators and its own goon squad. They have policies and procedures for silencing their victims. I refuse to be silenced, and I refuse to remain silent when children are in danger. Let me show you why. First of all, let's talk about Scientology's social media campaign to target vulnerable children and mothers. There's been an increased focus on recruiting children, specifically those born into Scientology, and making sure that they are indoctrinated at a young age. While this is no different than many religions, Scientology often takes it to the next level, charging for seminars, courses, and financially preying on mothers, making outlandish promises. For example, here's a flyer from 2016 promising to teach you how to give birth to a god using preventative Dianetics procedures. More recently, the focus has switched towards mothers themselves, and a sort of super crew of OT moms has been put together. OT is the highest spiritual level one can attain in the pay-to-play bridge to total freedom. This is a series of steps that one would ascend to what Scientology promises will give you power over matter, energy, space, and time. In their efforts to recruit new moms, they have put up social media posts such as this one. In promotional photos, which are taken at Scientology's flag headquarters in Clearwater, Florida, moms can be seen holding course packs, which are pay-as-you-go trainings, as well as Scientology's electric spiritual device, which we'll talk about a little bit more in this video. In the last few days, it's obvious that recruitment for moms is ramping up dramatically. Not just that, but 40 mothers will be attending Scientology's top secret, confidential, Free Winds cruise ship for the Route to Infinity convention. They are citing a movement to get 200 parents onto the upper, expensive Scientology confidential levels. Social media posts confirm that Scientology is focusing heavily not just on these mothers, but their extremely young children. This series of posts reference a 12-year-old, 6-year-old, and toddler-age child receiving Scientology services in their young lives.
The post reads, "Here are some more wins I'd like to share with you so you can see what kind of gains a child can have through their sessions. Quote, I got better at observing things and I can recall stuff further back. Yeah, it was fun. OL, 12 years old. I got better at swimming. My sister showed me, and because of the sessions, I could do it better. Doing this session was the most fun. SC, 6 years old. My son started sleeping in his crib again just after his first session. He got better at problem solving, and he started getting excited to come to Mace Kingsley Family Center. He started running up to his auditor for her to pick him up and go in session. If his auditor was in session when we arrived, he would go to the auditing hallway door and bang on it. In play, he is getting better at pushing the buttons of the toys and dancing to the music. When he comes out of session, he is always very happy."
The youngest of these children was just 1 year old. In another social media post, a 2-year-old is cited as having almost 40 hours of Scientology processing done to her at Mace Kingsley Auditing Center.
That post reads, "Why get your 2-year-old in session? Here is another success story that gives you an idea. My daughter has already had 3 intensives of auditing at Mace Kingsley Family Center. I see how she is becoming very self-determined. She is making her own choices and demonstrates it. She finishes cycles of action and she likes it. Her control is better and she knows where she put things. She is good at keeping things under her control. It is very cool. Thank you. Parent of a 2-year-old."
You might recall the name Mace Kingsley from Leah Remini's Scientology and the Aftermath, an expose on child abuse which occurred at Mace Kingsley's boarding school, otherwise known as the Mace Kingsley Ranch.
If you have not yet seen this Emmy Award-winning series, I highly encourage you to do so.
Not only is this business still charging to process Scientology on children, but they are actively recruiting for more staff, and Scientology is highlighting heavily their accomplishments. So, you might ask, what's the danger? What makes this religion any different than any other religion that encourages young people to participate and gain a faith and believe in a higher power? Well, as I said before, we're not going to talk about the beliefs as much as the practices. The first thing we need to establish is what a cult is. And I say this because cult is a word thrown around far too often. Today, I want to be clear. When we're saying the word cult, which we may interchange with these other terms, we are talking about a high control, high expectancy group. In terms of child development, this often means a rigid, authoritative structure with very high expectations and consequences for not achieving them. In many high control groups, high expectation groups, children's worth is deemed on what they have achieved or will achieve, and they are not often inherently loved or seen as having value for just existing. Our first red flag concerns Scientology's idea that children are adults in little bodies. What does this mean? Scientology as a faith believes in reincarnation. Here's a relevant quote from Scientology founder L. Ron Hubbard.
"A child is somebody that's just trying to get over a death, which might have been easy and might have been violent. He is just trying to recover from having shed all of his responsibilities. He's trying desperately to reorient himself in existence."
If children are deemed adults in little bodies, then they are expected to act, produce, and behave like adults. Sadly, when this is impossible for many children, they are deemed unfit and problematic. We see evidence of unrealistic age expectations with Scientology's C organization. To join this elite clergy of Scientology, one has to sign a billion-year contract. While a billion years is clearly unfathomable to most adults, it's ridiculous and unheard of, but several minors have signed this contract and have gone into the service of Scientology, foregoing a formal education, time with their family, etc. L. Ron Hubbard himself started the Commodore's Messenger Service, an elite core group of young children, approximately aged 12 to 13, who served his every whim. These children were removed from their families, brought up under an authoritative pseudo-military structure. If you would like a first-hand account on this, check out Janice Gilham Brady's books, as she was one of these children on the ship with L. Ron Hubbard. To further demonstrate the vulnerability, fanaticism, and intensity of children in these situations, I want to read you a quote. Scientology founder L. Ron Hubbard was once asked why he put the Commodore's Messengers service together. Here's what he said.
I once asked him why he chose young girls as messengers. He said it was an idea that he had picked up from Nazi Germany. He said Hitler was a madman, but nevertheless a genius in his own right, and the Nazi youth was one of the smartest ideas he ever had. With young people, you had a blank slate and you could write anything you wanted on it, and it would be your writing. That was his idea, to take young people and mold them into little Hubbards. He said he had girls because women were more loyal than men. Doreen Smith.
I share that quote to highlight the high expectation, high control that has mimicked other high expectation, high control groups, cults in the past. This indoctrination runs incredibly deep. In fact, current leader of Scientology, David Miscavige, was contracted into the Commodore's Messenger Service when he was a teenager. His allegedly missing wife, Shelley Miscavige, joined that same crew at 12 years old. There is a current groundbreaking lawsuit from some of these children against Scientology organizations and its leader, David Miscavige. 3 children, now grown, allege human trafficking, child forced labor, peonage, and deprivation of both a family time, and an education. One may argue that these children are grown now, and the intensity and high expectation on children today in Scientology has changed. However, this recent social media campaign has told us otherwise. Here's a social media post from a parent bragging that his 15-year-old son has recently completed a very high level in Scientology. He completed a training course called Pro TRs. Not just that, he trained full-time. That means just like a 9-to-5 job, he would have kept a Monday through Friday schedule.
The post reads, Our son, 15 years old, has completed Pro TRs at Flag. We have supported and helped guide him when needed. Our son's journey this life, and we are so proud of his decision to train full-time at Flag.
I hope that he already has a GED or high school equivalency and is not spending his time instead doing these trainings. However, without proper oversight, we'll never know.
The estimated time the 15-year-old would have taken to complete his course was 150 hours. In another case, a 12-year-old girl was cited as having completed a high auditing level. She attested to grade 1, meaning that if she went full-time, this would have taken 1.5 to 3 months. Whether or not you agree with the beliefs of Scientology, the expectation both in time and behavior on these children is exorbitant and should definitely be noted.
While these children are spending long hours in close proximity to authority figures and adults in their Scientology training and processing, they are sharing deeply personal information. Unfortunately, Scientology clergy do not consider themselves to be mandatory reporters to the authorities of abuse. In second-generation Scientologist Danny Masterson's recent trial, where he was convicted of 2 counts of forcible SA, and was sentenced to 30 to life in prison. Ex-Scientologist Claire Headley, who grew up in the Commodore's messenger service, testified to the following.
It is absolutely against the rules of Scientology to contact the authorities and the police.
Scientology's distrust for the authorities runs deep both in policy and in culture. Along with no access to reporting abuse to authorities, children growing up in Scientology have no access to traditional mental health services or even information. Scientology founder L. Ron Hubbard deemed all psychology and psychiatry and any scientific branch thereof to be dangerous. In fact, Scientology puts millions of dollars into their campaign, Psychiatry and Industry of Death, to further this message to the masses. Unfortunately for children growing up in Scientology who may need mental health services or assessment, they do not have access to this, and often their parents will make sure that they do not receive these services based on their religious beliefs, ideologies. In instances where children experience crisis, mental health crisis, or unaliving or serious developmental delays, issues, etc., they may need outside intervention, life-saving outside intervention that they won't get. To take this one step further, Scientology advocates for a purely Scientology education, using its study tech in all schools that children may attend. Culturally, it is deemed unacceptable for a child of Scientology to go to public school. It does happen, but in most cases, a child from pre-K all the way to graduation will attend a school that follows L. Ron Hubbard's study technology. There are many reasons that Scientology's study technology is religious doctrine disguised as curriculum. They actually diagnose physiological and physical symptoms as being psychosomatic. Here is a real example from their study manual.
The student is told that if he feels dizzy or like he's reeling, that it has to do with a missed study concept. This type of thinking blames the student instead of diagnosing and intervening where needed.
Study technology is deceptively passed off as scientific fact, making it unarguable, and thus authoritative control. Operating on this basis can significantly delay a child's access to early intervention services. Proper early diagnosis of learning disabilities, developmental delays, and any other factor that may affect a child's development is essential to having a healthy and happy childhood. By summing all learning problems and psychological and physical conditions while learning up into L. Ron Hubbard's 3 factors, this approach can delay and prevent proper diagnosis, sometimes setting children back years or even a lifetime. One of the absolute worst and most dangerous practices in Scientology is their use of forced confession and victim shaming, even and especially on children and other vulnerable individuals. The sense of victim shaming stems from very early in Scientology's history. In the founding book, Dianetics, L. Ron Hubbard has a controversial and, in my opinion, downright disgusting quote. Here it is.
The 7-year-old girl who shudders because a man kisses her is not computing. She is reacting to an engram, since at 7 years old she should see nothing wrong in a kiss, not even a passionate one. There must have been an earlier experience, possibly prenatal, which made men or kissing very bad.
In Scientology, there's a concept of pulling something in. Based on L. Ron Hubbard's mechanics of the mind, body, and soul, when a person does something wrong, they will essentially manifest something bad for themselves. In this way of thinking, anything bad that happens to us, whether we are responsible for it or not, would be because we have done something wrong to pull it in. As in the quote with the 7-year-old girl shuddering at a passionate kiss, in the language we can see that that's a her problem, not the adult guilty of such egregious behavior. We've seen this time and time again, and again recently in the Danny Masterson trial. All of his victims that testified to telling the Church of Scientology about the assault that they had endured, and instead of receiving care or empowerment, they were all subjected to interrogation and having to give up their crimes so as to describe and understand why they would have, quote, pulled in that essay. This type of indoctrination, unfortunately, starts very early and is very deep in Scientology. If we go back to the 12-year-old girl who recently completed her grade 1 auditing, and we dive a little deeper, we can find some really sinister aspects of vulnerable children at risk. Remember, grade 1 is a step on Scientology's pay-as-you-go bridge to total freedom, where at the top of the confidential levels you are promised power over matter, energy, space, and time, essentially to become a superhero, a god. Grade 1 is a specific step. The promised result of completing grade 1 is the ability to make problems vanish. The ability to recognize the source of problems and make them vanish. That sounds like an amazing quality, doesn't it? When we look deeper, we see the description of this person is someone who is no longer chronically stuck in their problems. It's hard to imagine a situation where a child might be chronically stuck in their problems. But if we look through the Scientological lens, any situation of a developmental delay, neurodivergency, behavioral issues, even diagnosable medical conditions that are of no fault of the child, such as autism or being on the spectrum, or suffered adversity or even abuse as a child. This level may be paraphrased as
realizing that many problems they thought were being done to them were either misidentified or self-created due to unresolved past situations.
In other words, what did you do to pull this in? And while a consenting adult can certainly submit to this level of interrogation, responsibility, and shame and blame-based thought, children should never be subjected to this type of thinking, let alone being held to the standard and high expectation of adults' understanding and behavior throughout the process. In many cases in Scientology handlings for problems, interrogation is the answer, and sadly, children do not get out unscathed. Here is Scientology's Children's Security Check, a 99-question interrogation to be done on Scientology's e-meter, which we are about to talk about. Once again, this is done in a closed room, in a closed setting with an authoritative figure. Everything the child has said is documented and written down. They have to sit in the chair and hold the cans of the e-meter and cannot move essentially, nor can they leave, nor do they have any agency in that situation.
At this point, I feel it important to point out the United Nations definition of torture. Any act which severe pain or suffering, whether physical or mental, is intentionally inflicted on a person for such purposes as obtaining from him or a third person information or a confession, punishing him for an act he or a third person has committed or is suspecting of having committed, or intimidating or coercing him or a third person, or for any reason based on discrimination of any kind when such pain or suffering is inflicted by or at the instigation of, or with the consent or acquiesce of a public official or other person acting in an official capacity.
The Children's Security Check or interrogation is a behavioral modification tool that is employed in Scientology and is assigned by church leaders to children that they deem problematic in whatever capacity. Having had this done to me on multiple occasions as a developing child, I can tell you that this strongly disrupts a person's sense of autonomy and agency. It instills a deep sense of shame and responsibility for things out of one's control. Again, if adults want to subject themselves consensually to this type of mental, psychological, and spiritual burden, that is their right. But to put this on a young child is completely unacceptable. It's time to talk about Scientology's e-meter. They consider it a religious artifact. They've tried to keep its technology secret, but the outside world knows that it essentially tests the reaction on one's skin. Common modern lie detectors use this as one element of a polygraph. Scientology, however, has classified this as a religious artifact that can essentially measure a soul's energy. Based on your mental imagery and how you react to certain past occurrences, it will measure the resistance of an electrical current going through your body. There have been no long-term studies about the effects that this has on young children or developing brains. Modern research, however, does strongly suggest that this type of electrical current, in conjunction with repetition and ritualistic behavior, can, in fact, induce electrohypnotism. It can put somebody in a suggestive state, otherwise known as light trance. The e-meter overrides a person's internal dialogue or their own knowledge base. Within Scientology, the e-meter trumps what anybody says, thinks, or does. If the e-meter says that you are withholding information, you are withholding information. If the e-meter says that you are an evil person, you are an evil person. Much of Scientology's training is spent learning this machine, this device. All interrogations and confidential levels in Scientology counseling essentially is done on one of these devices. The culture of Scientology teaches us that Scientology comes first and family comes second. This is backed up in confidential materials written by L. Ron Hubbard, the Scientology founder himself, where he deems family a distraction and even a mental trap. As these women, mothers, rise through the ranks of Scientology, they will become more and more indoctrinated in the belief that Scientology comes first and family second. There are countless stories of Scientology enforcing its disconnection policy, where mothers must cut ties with children, children must cut ties with their entire family, etc., etc. And again, while consenting adults can always choose to cut ties with members of their family, this being a threat held over a child their entire life if they ever step out of line or commit one of Scientology's treasonous high crimes, which always include speaking negatively about Scientology ever, in any capacity. So in other words, children in Scientology are raised to understand that if they publicly disavow their birth religion or highlight any of the abuses they have seen personally, they will lose their entire family. And the higher up these mothers get in the bridge to total freedom, the more willing they will be, most likely, and based on statistics, to cut ties with their own children. Once again, sadly, I am speaking from experience. I've not had communication with my mother in 7 years. And if I was to reach out to her and we rekindled our relationship, by Scientology's procedures and policies, she would lose all of her certificates and all of her progress in a religion that she has grown up in and spent 70 years in. This type of black and white, very intense lines drawn affects a child's attachment and their ability to trust growing up. Sadly, Scientology's policies essentially weaponize a mother's love. The more she loves her child, the more she will give them up to Scientology, and the more control she will let the organization exert over their upbringing and indoctrination. Mothers in Scientology, ex-members who've come out and told their stories, have talked about being treated horribly. Being a mother in Scientology is not easy. Not only does she have to conform to being a Scientologist herself and following all the rules that a good cult member must follow, but now she is tasked with indoctrinating the next generation into said cult. And I call to any Scientologist mother or caregiver who would be willing to have an open dialogue about these points with me. Because I have no doubt that these mothers love their children very much. Much like my own mother, it appears that their motivation to go up the bridge to total freedom is to be a good mother to their children. And this is their idea of doing so. It's unclear if they're aware of any of these facts or if they have chosen willful ignorance. But I think it's time that we raise the alarm bells because this is very disturbing. If you want to learn more about ex-Scientology kids who grew up in Scientology and their stories, check out these websites. If you want to see the list that I maintain on my website of the children who Scientology failed, you can check it out here. So what can we do? Number one, contact your local politicians. A great conversation starter is, would you support the investigation of Scientology's tax-exempt status in the United States? This political and financial question can often open a rabbit hole for community leaders to go down. Of course, please educate others on the dangers of Scientology. Share this video. Like and follow, subscribe, all the things. Just as there are many moms training to indoctrinate their children in Scientology, there are moms and professional childhood educators like myself who are working to combat it and educate the general public as to why this is a dangerous decision and should be, at the very least, monitored and called out. If you see abuse or know of abuse happening to anybody, particularly children or any vulnerable population or person, call it in. Here is the National Child Abuse Hotline phone number. Whether or not you've taken an oath to be a mandatory reporter like I have or have been called to in your profession or your journey in life, please consider that if you see something, you could be the difference that you'll never know. So please call it in. Lastly, if you liked what you saw today and you want to throw me a little love, there are a few ways you can support me. You can buy my book on Amazon called Confessions of an Ex-Scientologist Pothead. There are a few merch items available on my YouTube store. And keep an eye out for my next book, Confessions of an Ex-Scientologist Mom. Because I dipped my toe in this arena once upon a time, when I was a new mother, and I truly believed that Scientology was the only way to raise a healthy and happy child. And it is one of my confessions in my upcoming book that everything I knew about child development that I learned in Scientology was wrong. And I hope that today I was able to utilize a little bit of my experience, a little bit of my education to explain to you today some of the reasons why Scientology in practice for children is dangerous. As always, what do you think? What am I missing? What are some other compelling topics I can add to this list to really raise the alarm for educators, legislators, and caregivers and parents? And do you agree that mothers raising children in our society should be protected at all costs? And if they're about to raise a generation highly indoctrinated in a dangerous cult, it might be time to listen to the past generation that Scientology raised. The message is clear. There should be no more children in Scientology, because at the end of the day, children cannot consent. I urge you to share this message. I urge you to dive down the rabbit holes. Get back to me. Let me know what you found. Consider yourself a mandatory reporter to raise the flag, raise the alarm bell on what is about to happen to another generation of innocent children. Children deserve autonomy and agency. They deserve protection. They deserve for their rights to be upheld. They did not pull in a childhood in Scientology, and they should not be penalized for it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for supporting me, my channel, my peers, this mission. If you have any advice or constructive criticism on how I might deliver this message more effectively in the future, I am certainly open to it. And if you are an active Scientologist and you are willing to have an open dialogue with me about any of these points or the topic at large, please don't hesitate to reach out. My email is here at the bottom of the screen, and that goes for all of you. Thanks for sticking around to the end, and I will catch you in the next one. All right, bye everyone.
She knows herself, she finds her way. Through art and joy, she shapes each day, crafting beauty from the past.